Was Darren Abbey defending himself when he took Dustin Kjersem's life with an axe? Hey everyone, it's Lucky with Unfiltered Lucky. And today I want to talk about the Dustin Kjersem case. Now, before I start this video, I want to let you all know that this weekend we will be talking about the Idaho 4. So stay tuned for that. But there's been some updates in the Dustin Kjersem case now that they have a suspect in custody. So today I want to talk about some of these updates and talk a little bit about what this suspect is telling law enforcement. Now, if you're not familiar with this case, go back and watch my video about what law enforcement thought was a bear attack at a campground just outside of Bozeman, Montana. I am going to do a quick summary just to get you all caught up. Now, on October 10th, just over a month ago, 35-year-old Dustin Kjersem and his girlfriend had plans to go camping in an area called Moose Creek just outside of Bozeman, Montana for the weekend. Now, Dustin's girlfriend had to work that week, so Dustin had planned to head out that Thursday, a day early, and then set up camp, and then go back and pick up his girlfriend in town on that Friday when she got off of work, and they were going to enjoy a weekend of camping. On my last video about the Dustin Kjersem crime, a lot of you had a very, very good question. And that question was, why would Dustin Kjersem go out to this campsite, set up all of his camping gear, and then just leave it unattended while he went back to pick up his girlfriend to bring her back the next day? And that's a very good question. Now, I'm an avid camper. I spend a lot of time in the mountains and I spend a lot of time outdoors. And one thing that I can say is that it's not uncommon at all for people to leave their campsites unattended for periods of time, hours, maybe even an entire day. And, now that I'm saying it out loud, it does seem kind of strange that we do that. Maybe it's a false sense of security because we're in the mountains. But it's very common for campers to leave their campsites unattended for periods of time. So I didn't think it was odd that Dustin Kjersem had planned to leave all of his camping gear out there and go back and pick up his girlfriend to bring her back. Dustin's trip from the campsite back to town to pick up his girlfriend would have been less than 2 hours round trip to go out there and pick her up and bring her back. So it didn't strike me as odd at all that he would leave his campsite unattended for a couple of hours. Now, Dustin's plan was to go pick up his girlfriend after she got off of work on that Friday. And when he never showed up, she became worried. Now, Dustin's girlfriend and a friend went looking for him, and she knew that he was going to be in the Moose Creek area. So that's where they went, and when she recognized Dustin's tent, she knew that she was at the right campsite. Now, when she entered the tent, she found Dustin Kjersem deceased from what her and her friend believed could be a bear attack. She described the injuries as so vicious that they believed that a bear had attacked Dustin Kjersem. Dustin's girlfriend called 911 immediately, and when law enforcement arrived at the crime scene, they began collecting evidence. They found a couple of shot glasses that appeared to have tequila inside of them. They also collected a number of beer cans inside and outside of Dustin's tent. Now, when they processed these beer cans, they found DNA, and they ran that DNA through the CODIS system, and they got a hit. Now, oddly enough, they got a hit on 2 separate people with the same DNA. The results from CODIS came back to twin brothers, Dustin and Darren Abbey. Now, Dustin Abbey had been locked up since September, so a couple of weeks before these crimes occurred. So he had an alibi, which left Darren Abbey. Now, Darren Abbey was picked up, and eventually he admitted to taking the life of Dustin Kjersem. Darren Abbey tells investigators that he had plans to camp in the Moose Creek area that weekend. He even had a campsite all picked out. But when he arrives at this campsite, there's already someone there, Dustin Kjersem. So Abbey says that he approaches the campsite and that Dustin welcomes him in, offers him a beer, and the two men sit down and begin talking and drinking. At some point, Abbey says that him and Dustin Kjersem end up inside of Dustin's tent, which, when I first heard this, I thought that was kind of odd. Like I said, I do a lot of camping, and I can't really imagine just inviting a complete stranger inside my tent. That's where you sleep, and that's where you keep a lot of your belongings. So I could understand inviting them to your campsite, maybe sit around the fire, have a few drinks, and make a new friend or two. But it seemed odd to me that Dustin Kjersem would invite a complete stranger inside his tent. Until I read in an article where Dustin Kjersem's family stated that he had a very large tent that even included a wood-burning stove. So that made a lot more sense because investigators found these shot glasses and these beer cans outside of the tent, which would indicate that these two men likely began drinking around the campfire. Now, in mid-October, it's going to be very cold in the Montana forest. So I'm sure as it started getting darker, the temperature began to drop drastically, and it would make sense that the two men decided to go inside the tent, get some cover, and drink by the wood-burning stove so that they could warm up. The number of beer cans as well as the shot glasses would indicate that these two men had been drinking for some time and were probably pretty intoxicated at this point. So Abbey says that at some point, his dog walks over Dustin Kjersem's air mattress. So basically tracks mud all over his sleeping area. And that Dustin Kjersem gets angry and threatens his dog and threatens to take his life. So Darren Abbey says that him and Dustin Kjersem get into a fight over this. Abbey tells investigators that during this fight, he hits Dustin Kjersem in the head with a block of wood. Now, he says that Dustin Kjersem keeps coming, so he hits him 2 more times in the head with that same block of wood. Now, as these two men are struggling, Darren Abbey says that he sees a screwdriver, and he grabs the screwdriver and he stabs Dustin Kjersem in the neck. So he tells law enforcement that Dustin Kjersem is still moving, and that's when he decides to take his life with a camping axe. So basically what Darren Abbey is saying is that he took Dustin Kjersem's life in self-defense. He tells investigators that he was defending himself as well as his dog. Now we have to remember these two men had been drinking for quite a while and were likely very intoxicated at this point. So basically it's the suspect, Darren Abbey's word against the evidence. Because there were 2 men there as well as a dog, but one of those men, Dustin Kjersem, is now deceased. So Darren Abbey can say whatever he wants at this point about what happened. And basically it's up to investigators to use the evidence to figure that out. Now, Darren Abbey has a violent past. People who have worked with him and lived around him or come into contact with Darren Abbey have said that he bragged about doing time in prison and that he was very intimidating. Some people even described him as being creepy. Now, he admitted to taking Dustin Kjersem's life, but he said that the only reason he did that was because of this fight. So like I said, Abbey is claiming that he was defending himself from Dustin Kjersem, that he didn't just attack him out of the blue, that this was the result of maybe 2 men who had had too much to drink and got into a fight. And Abby's saying that he had to protect himself and his dog. Now, the only problem that I have with the whole self-defense idea is that, in my opinion, if it was self-defense, if Darren Abbey was defending himself against Dustin Kjersem, then why wouldn't he call law enforcement? That's what I don't understand. You hear a lot of cases like this where people say that they took someone's life in self-defense. But then the problem is they never call law enforcement. And I realize that he has a violent past. You know, he's been to prison, he's done time. So he has a violent past, which may have kept him from calling law enforcement. But in my opinion, to brutally take someone's life and then just leave them inside of a tent without calling 911 afterward to report what had happened kind of tells me that he believed that he could get away with this. After Darren Abbey takes the life of Dustin Kjersem, he begins collecting items from around the campsite that he believes might tie him to the crime. He also steals a few valuables, some firearms, and some camping gear. And then he leaves Dustin Kjersem deceased inside the tent. Now, Abbey tells investigators that he leaves a beanie at the campsite. So the next day, he goes back to retrieve his beanie. He goes inside the tent to confirm that Dustin Kjersem is deceased. He steals a few more items, and then he leaves. For Abbey to return to the campsite the next day after he's taken Dustin Kjersem's life is very risky. And in my opinion, it's a good indication that he didn't feel as though he would get caught. Now, some people from the surrounding area around the Moose Creek area came forward and they stated that they had run into Darren Abbey and that Darren Abbey was telling them that he planned on going camping in the Moose Creek area that weekend. They also said that he kind of gave them the creeps, that he bragged about being in prison, and they also believed that he might be in an organization. Although Darren Abbey is telling investigators that he was forced to take Dustin Kjersem's life to defend his own, as well as his dog, investigators aren't buying what he's selling. They're saying that there's too many inconsistencies in his statements and that his statements do not match up with the evidence. The judge agrees and gave Darren Abbey a $1.5 million bond. So tell me what you think. Do you think that Darren Abbey was defending himself? Do you think that this was two men who got drunk, got into a fight, and that Darren Abbey had to take it to the extreme in order to keep himself from getting hurt? Or do you think that Darren Abbey just saw an opportunity to steal some of Dustin Kjersem's things and maybe take someone's life without getting caught because they were in such a remote area? Let me know what you think in the comments, and thanks for hanging out with me today. I really do appreciate it. And if you liked my video, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to my channel. I hope that y'all had an amazing day. We'll see you next time.